That's one small step for man.
I have a dream.
We fight for peace. Welcome to American Snapshots from America Comes Alive. I'm Kate Kelly, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the history of Candyland. Now, Candyland has a great subtitle. It's known as the Sweet Little Game for Sweet Little Folk. And if you played it as a child, you probably very likely played it on a game board like this. These were the characters you would be starting out as, and you hope to spin through the peppermint forest and around the lollipop wood, avoiding the dreaded molasses swamp, and make it all the way to home sweet home. Now, I loved this game as a child, but when I became a parent, I felt very differently about it. It was like when we would get that plea for playing a game of Candyland, it was just like, oh my goodness, this is so frustrating. It just doesn't end. All the same, Candyland is one heck of a successful game, and I thought I ought to look into who thought of it, why they thought of it, and to what we owe its success. I discovered that Candyland was designed in the 1940s, and it came about because of the outbreak of polio that the country was seeing. Polio was terribly frightening. Families were so fearful that their children would be paralyzed by it. It was the fastest growing infectious disease with young children, and it didn't limit itself to children. Adults also could get it. Now, initially, the disease would present as a virus. And if you were very fortunate, the virus simply resolved itself. But in some cases, paralysis would set in. Sometimes paralysis would go away, and sometimes it just didn't. But whatever it was, if you got to that level of the disease, it was a very long and slow recovery. And it also required specially trained people, special equipment. And so what America's solution was to build polio wards. But only certain hospitals were going to have these wards. They would set up wards for adults and wards for children, and those would be the places you would take your family if they were actually suffering from polio. It could be a 2, 3, 4 or 5 hour car ride from where you actually lived. Now, in that day and age, we didn't have helicopter parents, and the parents were far more likely to need to go home to a job or to take care of the rest of the children. So you would drop your child off at one of these polio wards and have to leave them in the care of the medical experts. Now, the kids were well cared for. They had the doctors, they had the physical therapy that was going on, so they were getting the important things, but there was nobody to kind of keep them happy under those circumstances. And that brings us to a polio ward in San Diego, California. This happened to be about a woman who was in the polio ward, and she was a retired teacher named Eleanor Abbott. So even though there would have been a polio ward for adults and one for children, Eleanor was certainly, as a former teacher, very aware of the fact that there were young children with nothing to do. So she began to put her mind to what would be a satisfying game that would let them keep themselves occupied. She knew a couple of things. To do a game well like that, it needed to be a game full of wonder, something that would really excite children. Well, what's more exciting to children than a world filled with candy? The second thing it needed was to be a very simple game, something that didn't have complicated instructions and that didn't require reading in order to play the game. So she came up with this color system where you would draw a color and move to the color of square on the board. If you were very fortunate and drew a picture, you went directly to, like in this case, Peppermint Stick Forest, which actually isn't very far along, but it gets you along the way in kind of an exciting way if you're a child. So those were a couple of the ingredients. But then there was a third thing that she had in mind, and this was what explained a lot to me. It was designed as a game that didn't necessarily need to end. As one expert said, and there are experts on Candyland, the game functioned as a loop. It wasn't a line. It was designed for these children to be able to while away the hours without necessarily having a winner or a loser. Now, at that point, my heart really softened for the game because I thought, oh my goodness, those poor children, they had nobody to kind of see them through this time, so let them have their unending game of Candyland. But then I learned something else that really made an impact on me. The initial little boy on the first game that she created, in order to identify with the people who were playing the game, the little boy had a leg brace because many of the victims of polio actually needed to wear leg braces. So there you are with a child with a physical difference, part of a game in the 1940s. Unfortunately, that got airbrushed out. And I was not able to find a copy of that particular game, but I was able to find a photograph in a book of the thing, and I will show you that picture. It shows you a very thin line as to his leg brace, but still, think about it. Today, in this day and age where anybody with a physical difference has to really fight to become accepted in certain aspects of American life and certainly to be included in advertising, how great would our world have been if in the 1940s we started out with a child with a leg brace? So, missed opportunity in that case. But the game went on to do just great for Eleanor Abbott and for all the children who've played it through all these years. Her friends had suggested she try to sell the game. She approached Milton Bradley. They liked the game, bought it in 1949, and it is still owned by Milton Bradley and still sells very well for Milton Bradley. Milton Bradley is now part of Hasbro, but it's all one big happy family. In 2005, Candyland was inducted into the National Toy Hall of Fame, and it has gone on in many iterations, which explains its popularity. As new characters have become popular among young children, there have been deals made so that there's been a Winnie the Pooh game, there's been a Dora the Explorer game, and so I'm sure the life of this game is just going to go on and on. When I think back on my years of parenting and all those requests of just one game of Candyland for my kids at bedtime always, it makes me realize they were a lot smarter than I thought. They knew if they played that game, it wasn't necessarily going to end.
It's one small step for man.
I have a dream.
We fight